Okay, so now we're going to talk about barriers to diffusion, things that get in the way of molecules spreading out wherever they can go, from where there's more to where there's less. There's two basic types of diffusion barrier. The first type is not used in living things, and the second type is used in living things. But I did want to mention the first type. The first type of diffusion barrier is called the impermeable barrier. The word impermeable means you can't pass through it. Permeable means to pass through, but impermeable means it can't be passed through. So impermeable barriers block the diffusion of all chemicals. There is no chemical that can spread through an impermeable barrier. Now, if you think about it, impermeable barriers are made also of chemicals. So just like the chemicals that are spreading, impermeable barriers are made of chemicals too. But what makes impermeable barriers impermeable is they are solids, and they're solids that are made of chemicals that are so tightly packed together that other chemicals can't pass between the chemical of the barrier, which means they can't get through it. So one type of impermeable barrier is called glass. Glass is, of course, what you get when you melt sand and then let it cool down. Turns out that glass itself is made of silicon oxide, actually silicon dioxide molecules. Silicon dioxide molecules, they pack together so tightly that no other chemicals can squeeze between the silicon dioxide molecules, which means that glass is a perfect diffusion barrier. Whatever you put in the glass will not be able to spread out of the glass. So even though inside the glass here we have water and we have a blue dye, those chemicals cannot fit between the chemicals of the glass. And so they can't spread out directly through the glass. Now, of course, if I leave the glass open like this, the chemicals that can evaporate, like water, can spread out of the glass this way, where it's open. But if this were a sealed glass container, that is, if there were also a top made of glass, then the chemicals that are inside here would stay inside here forever. There is no chemical that can spread through glass. That's why in chemistry labs, most of the containers for the chemicals in a chemistry lab, and it doesn't even matter which chemical it is, most of the containers are made of glass. And that's because there's nothing that can spread through glass. So as long as the glass doesn't shatter, as long as it stays intact, none of the chemicals in any of those containers is going to get out. So that's a perfect diffusion barrier, glass. There's really only one other perfect diffusion barrier on Earth, and that's a substance called diamond. In diamond, which is made of just large molecules of carbon, the atoms are packed so tightly together and the molecules are packed so tightly together in diamond that, again, nothing can spread through them. Of course, the reason they don't use diamond to hold liquids in chemistry labs is that would be a little expensive to get diamond containers. So glass is a lot cheaper, and it does the same thing. Now, impermeable barriers are great because no chemicals can diffuse through them, but living things don't have those chemicals. Living things aren't made of diamond or of glass. So unfortunately for living things, they don't have any perfect diffusion barriers. Instead, what they have are partial barriers. They use what are called semi-permeable barriers. So the word semi means partly in Latin. And again, permeable is to penetrate or to move through. So living things surround themselves and surround their parts with semi-permeable barriers, which don't block everything. There are some chemicals that can diffuse through those barriers, but there are other chemicals that can't. So a couple of semi-permeable barriers that you find in living things, for example, in your body, your skin is a semi-permeable barrier. Your skin blocks the movement of a lot of chemicals. It keeps most of the chemicals in you, and it keeps most of the chemicals outside of you. So that really the only chemicals that get in or out of you are the ones that can go in through your openings, the openings in your skin like your mouth or your nose. So skin is a very good semi-permeable barrier, and it's particularly good at blocking water. Water molecules that are in you can't spread out through your skin, and water outside of you can't spread in too well through your skin. So since your body is mostly water, it's your skin that actually holds in most of your water and keeps it all from leaving you right away. It dramatically slows down your dehydration. It's not perfect only because there are holes in it, like your mouth and your nose, where water actually can escape. Every time you exhale, some water escapes out through your mouth from your lungs. But most of your body is covered with skin, and that really dramatically slows down the evaporation of water from your body. Another barrier that you commonly find in living things are what are called membranes. And all of your cells, this is actually a microscopic picture of blood cells, but every cell in your body is surrounded by a covering, which is made of fat and protein, and that covering is called the cell membrane. That's a semi-permeable barrier. Again, it lets some chemicals in and out of the cell, but it actually keeps most of the chemicals in the cell inside and prevents most of the chemicals outside the cell from getting in. So because the cells of your body, like your blood cells, your muscle cells, they create certain chemicals that they really need to keep local so they can use them, the membrane is usually good at blocking the chemicals that cells really need. For example, proteins can't get out through the membrane. And the energy chemical that your cells use, called ATP, which is the energy storage chemical in cells, that also can't get out through the membrane. So the membranes do allow your cells to hold on to chemicals that they need while keeping other undesirable chemicals out of the cell. But cell membranes are not perfect barriers. There are certain chemicals that can get in and out of cells through the membrane, and some of those chemicals are chemicals that cells need, like oxygen gas or sugar. Those chemicals can get through the membrane, and that's good for cells because they need those chemicals. But other chemicals that the cells really need and don't want to lose that are inside, like proteins and ATP, those don't get out through the membrane. One thing that's interesting about your cell membrane versus your skin is a very good barrier against water diffusion, but your cell membranes are not. They actually do not block the movement of water. So the cell membrane allows water to come into the cell, and it also allows water to leave the cell, whereas your skin is really there to block water movement. And that's because skin is not made of the same stuff as cell membranes are. Those are different kinds of semi-permeable barriers, so they let in and out different things. Okay, so the fact that your body has no perfect diffusion barriers, it has no impermeable barriers, it has semi-permeable barriers, which can block some chemicals from passing through, but not every chemical. That has enormous consequences for living things. Living things use these semi-permeable barriers to try to keep certain chemicals more concentrated in certain areas of the body. But these barriers are not perfect. And so all living things have to deal with the imperfection of their barriers, the fact that they actually can't stop the movement of all chemicals and the spreading out of all chemicals that they need. So what we're going to talk about in the next video is one of the consequences of the semi-permeable cell membrane, which is that it can't block water. And so that creates a situation where cells actually have to be concerned with gaining too much water or losing too much water, depending on the level of water inside them versus the level of water around them. So all living things have a water issue, a water diffusion issue that they have to deal with because their barriers to diffusion are not perfect. And we're going to talk about the water issues of diffusion for living things in the next video.